I think now more than ever, it's important to just know how to learn. I think everybody has an opportunity to evolve. I know some people say, Ben, well, all your traits are developed within your first 10 years. I don't necessarily believe that. My recommendation is whether it's this podcast or if there's a book that you're reading, take it from just learning to execution. I also played for some terrible baseball coaches. And one of the things that stands out for me the most is I had this one coach who, and it's funny because he's actually a manager in the big leagues now, he made everything about himself. So if things were going well, he'd take all the credit. It was the lineup changes he made. It was the starting pitcher. But the second things didn't go well, if we lost the game because the fourth up hitter struck out with the bases loaded, then he'd blame that person, which happened to be me a couple of times. I ended up having a great career at Arizona State. And then, Ben, when I was ready to move on and play professional baseball, I didn't get drafted again. And when I didn't get drafted again, I basically was 22 years old and had an identity crisis because I was like, well, who am I?
You're listening to the Real Business Connections Network. Real Business Connections Network. Powered by Balbert Marketing, LLC. Subscribe now and check us out at realbusinessconnections.com. Enjoy the show.
So the question of the century is a leader. I know Tom Golisano even wrote a book, Built Not Born. Is a leader built or are they born? Or you tell me.
So I don't think leaders are born or made. I think they're constantly in the making. I like to say great leaders aren't born or made, they're constantly in the making. And what I mean by that is you look at it, some people think that leaders have this innate ability, these special talents, Ben, and that's just the way it goes. I don't believe that. And other people will say, well, I've made it as a leader. I know everything I need to know. I don't buy that one either. I think it's a constant, continuous journey of learning, adapting, growing, and reiterating and iterating as you move forward in your life and your career and your leadership journey.
So I agree it's a constant journey, but one thing I'm curious about is I even remember when I was younger, there was like the charismatic kids and then there was the bullies and then there was the nice kids. Like I was the one getting bullied and then there was people standing up for me and they just seemed like they were born to be leaders. Were they wired differently? Does the bully have an inability to be a leader? I presume you're going to say no.
Well, I would say that the bully doesn't have the inability to be a leader. And I think a lot of times it starts at home. It starts at home with the confidence that kids get, from their parents and their upbringing and their friends. And if the kids have the confidence, then a lot of times they're not going to let these bullies push them around. And I think some of the bullies are just doing that because they lack self-confidence. So, but I think everybody has an opportunity to evolve. I know some people say, Ben, well, all your traits are developed within your first 10 years. I don't necessarily believe that. I believe that I've become a more humble person over the last 30 years than I was. I was never a bully, but I think that you have the opportunity to grow and evolve and change if you want to.
And that's why I love Learn It. I love that you're out there speaking. I love you're putting out YouTube videos and courses where we can constantly learn, constantly evolve. You had just mentioned how like some people think the first 10 years, I know you're an advocate. You talk about like your experience in athletics and how that helped you become a leader. Do you want to expand on, you were a baseball player, right?
Correct. The very short version of my career, of my baseball story, is I grew up in an area where all we did was playing sports, baseball, football, basketball. I know you wanted to be Michael Jordan. I wanted to be George Brett. And I also played basketball, but I realized my sophomore year in high school that if I was going to play college or professional, it had to be baseball. So I went all in. I worked really hard at baseball, got a full ride, was a high school All-American, got drafted by the Atlanta Braves. But I went to college and I had some imposter syndrome. I bounced around colleges. I ended up having a great career at Arizona State. And then, Ben, when I was ready to move on and play professional baseball, I didn't get drafted again. And when I didn't get drafted again, I basically was 22 years old and had an identity crisis because I was like, well, who am I? I put all my eggs in this basket to be a baseball player. And here I am, 22 years old, and I didn't think any of my skills were transferable. And I didn't really know what to do. But what I realized over the years, I took a job at Learn It as a receptionist, was just starting, and I worked my way up. And what I've learned is that those skills that I learned in sports were incredibly transferable, and they've helped me throughout my career and helped mold my leadership style.
Talk about some of those skills. I know we talked about this. I was just on your podcast. That's in the notes. Please go subscribe to that. I
Thank
talked
you.
about how there's no key, it's a combination. So, but I'm curious, what are some of those combination points, some of those skills that were transferable into your career and your role as a CEO right now?
Well, first and foremost, work ethic. I think that it's bred into you really is the work ethic when it comes with sports, but also uh, persistence, adaptability, and collaboration, which is fantastic and so important as a leader. The collaboration and communication. What it taught me playing in baseball was if I struck out with a guy on second and third, and there's only one out, then the guy hitting behind me, he had my back. He came and got a hit and drove the runs in. And I think that is way business should be as well. If you got to have each other's back, and so that's one of the skills that I learned is collaboration, teamwork, work ethic, and also one of the skills, Ben, that I think, and I think you'll agree with this, is most important in today's world is learning agility. I think now more than ever, it's important to just know how to learn. And the reason why that's important is the average lifespan of a skill is 6 months, and you got to be rapid, able to learn, and you put it into action. And I learned that in baseball, you step up to the plate, you strike out, you get some feedback from your coach. 30 minutes later, you got to step back up to the plate and you got to
Mm.
make those adjustments and you got to rapidly learn and know how to execute.
These are all good points. There's consistency, pivoting to learn. There's showing up with hard work. There's collaboration. I kind of want to get into like the let's do this. So I want to talk more about what a good leader looks like and how they show up for their team, how they show up as just a kick butt professional like you do. But before we go there, what does a bad leader look like? What's an example of bad leadership? And we can kind of look ourselves in the mirror and be like, is this me or is this a team member? Or you tell us, what does a bad leader look like?
I think that's a great question. In my book, The Learn It All Leader, I talk about learn it alls and know it alls. Know it alls are leaders who have it all figured out. They have all the answers. And they're also typically, Ben, they're the bottleneck in an organization because everything has to go through them, right?
Mm.
People are afraid to try and do things because they'll get shamed on, if that's lack of a better term, by their boss, right? So people are afraid to make mistakes. I think bad leaders don't provide the psychological safety for people to try and do things and aren't supportive of their team. I played for 3 Hall of Fame baseball coaches. I also played for some terrible baseball coaches. And one of the things that stands out for me the most is I had this one coach who, and it's funny because he's actually a manager in the big leagues now. He made everything about himself. So if things were going well, he'd take all the credit. It was the lineup changes he made. It was the starting pitcher. But the second things didn't go well, if we lost a game because a fourth up hitter struck out with the bases loaded, then he'd blame that person, which happened to be me a couple of times. And so what I learned from that was bad bosses are ones who put themselves in the spotlight when things are going well, but they play the victim if things aren't going well. So they're taking all of the gratitude away from their team. Where I think great leaders, they want to make their team shine. They want to put people up front. They want people to be inspired and not afraid to try and do things and fail. Because going back to what I said earlier, because people know that their boss and their coworkers have their back. So I think that that's kind of the difference between a great boss and a bad boss.
I love that. And I have an open loop, something I'm curious about. You mentioned how maybe you had a bad coach. You talked a little bit about them, but you also you were on a team with 3 Hall of Fame coaches. We don't have to go through every detail of all of them, but you got me interested. You got me curious. What is at least one of those coaches, and what did they teach you?
So the first coach, and I won't go through all three of them. Let's just start. We'll start with Andy Lopez, he won the College World Series at Pepperdine, and then he won it again at Arizona, and actually got Florida to it. And what I learned from him when I was recruited by him, Pepperdine was a 2,500 person school, and he said he had moonshot vision. Ben, he was determined to win the College World Series. He said, "You come here, we're going to win the College World Series. We're going to put together a team, and we're going to beat these powerhouses like LSU and Arizona State, all these different places." And some of us believed it, some of us didn't, but he got everybody staring in the right direction. And it was a single clear vision. Now, I got hurt and ended up leaving, but the very next year, Ben, they won the College World Series. So that's one thing I learned from him, is that you could set moonshot visions and you can go for it, right? And don't let people tell you can't do something. I connected with Coach Lopez 30 years later. We had lunch and we talked about a lot of different things. And the other thing I learned from him is he had two rules. And his two rules were show up on time. That's non-negotiable. And number two was do the right thing. And show up on time is, it's pretty simple, right? If your meeting's at 11 o'clock, you show up at 10:45, right? You're early. The second one, do the right thing. A lot of the players would say, "Well, coach, what do you mean by that? That's kind of broad." He said, "You know what that is. You do the right thing all the time. Have integrity, lead with integrity, and don't put yourself in a position where you're going to get yourself in trouble, because unless you're, like you'd say, unless you're stupid, you know the difference between right and wrong. So show up on time and do the right thing." I'll fast forward to my last coach, Jim
Please.
Brock, who I played for at Arizona State. I learned from him courage. Jim Brock was in the final stages of cancer the year I played. Super famous coach. He coached people like Barry Bonds and all these other guys. And when he was going through chemo, a lot of days he couldn't make it out to the field. Some days he could. And on the days that he could, it was just having him there, just having his presence. And he ended up dying during the middle of the College World Series. He came to game one. I hit a home run in game one. And after the game, the last conversation I had with him is he said, "Come over here, Lembi." And he said, "That was the ugliest home run trot I've ever seen anybody have." And he's like, "Get out of here." And I never saw him again, but just the courage to show up, live his life, and the passion that he had. It's just something that stuck with me my whole life, is that you got to have courage. And it was just, those are just a couple examples. We could go on for 10 hours of what I've learned from these coaches and how it helped model my perspective on leadership.
Since we can't go a 10 full hours, Learn It All podcast. Where is the best place for people to, you put out so much content, so much value, whether it's buying a course or a free YouTube. We could go 10 hours with you and just a click of a button, right? Where should people go?
Well, first connect with me on LinkedIn,
Cool.
Damon Lembi on LinkedIn, and then check out our website, learnit.com. And if you go to the website and you find a class that you like, send me a message on LinkedIn and tell that you saw me on Ben's show, and I'll give you a free class. I mean, the classes are $250. All I ask is if you take me up on this offer, that you show up and you give me feedback on the class. And I love feedback. So please do that. And finally, I really enjoy doing the podcast these days, the Learn It All podcast. So those are really the three places I recommend looking for me at.
That's an incredible offer. I hope people take you up on it. I know it might feel like a lot, but what's the worst that could happen? You get a free course, you take it, you get better at X, Y, and Z skill, right?
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, people are paying $250 for a 2-hour class on emotional intelligence or critical thinking or how to use pivot tables in Excel. So carve out the 2 hours. They're live classes, and I'm confident you'll get value out of it.
So I have a personal question. Do you still go by Lembi?
It's kind of cheesy, but a lot of people call me Big D. Hey, Big D. But I prefer Lemby. Damon's kind of hard to say.
Damon. I don't think any of that's hard to say, but I like it. Lemby, like back in the baseball days.
Yeah.
Um, you already gave an incredible free offer. If someone is confused as to how to like cash in on that, send me a DM or send Damon a DM on LinkedIn, connect with him. That's a bigger assignment. I always like to give a super small integration assignment where maybe we can just get a little bit of momentum. And I honestly encourage people just to go and take the 2 hours to take you up on that. But is there something super small that we can do as early as right now to just start moving in a better direction in terms of our self or our team leadership?
Well, first of all, Ben, I like what you said. Do things that are super small because I think that you should look at life as a marathon, not a sprint. And in that, you want to take little steps along the way. So if you're listening to this podcast, you obviously have a learning mentality, right? Because that's why you're here. My recommendation is whether it's this podcast or if there's a book that you're reading, take it from just learning to execution. I had somebody tell me um, once that learning without doing is treason, and I believe that you got to put some of it into action. So if you got anything out of listening to me or going on Ben's and listening to another episode, and you enjoyed something, and you said, "Hey, this is something I could do," just do it, even if it's something very simple and quick. If it's a morning habit, if it's something you learned about in a conversation, but take it from just learning to implementation. And it could just be something very small.
And I want to leave it up to the listener to kind of determine like what's speaking to me. But what I'm going to say this out loud. You mentioned consistency. You mentioned hard work. You mentioned teamwork. You mentioned giving criticism, but ultimately in a kind way for your team members. These are all things that stood out for me. I know consistency is something once in a while I struggle with. I hurt my arm, so I'm not going to the gym and I'm all out of my normal routine. So I think I just provided a lot of just simple things that, and you said a ton here that we can just take one thing and then what should we do? Just like, what's the action plan look like to change?
I would say, let's say, for instance, that you're struggling with your work ethic. Just just get up let's say it's going to the gym, and tomorrow you don't want to go to the gym. Just go to the gym. Just do it. Just get out of your comfort zone and do it. And I would just remember what we talked about today about the integration and just getting something done. So just take the small step and make it happen. Usually the toughest thing is to just put your gym shorts on and shoes, and once you're out the door, you're fine.
So what do you think, Damon? I was just on your show. That's in the notes. I encourage people to listen to that if they want to hear my story. You just kicked butt in a short amount of time. Was it a grand slam? Did we do it?
Well, I think it's great. I mean, I learned so much from you, Ben, on the episode on my show. The plus, minus, equal, and everything we talked about, the keys to success and how humble you are and everything. And so I really love that. And I love the quick to the point stuff that we discussed here. So, I mean, you're a pro at this, though. I'm learning. I'm learning from you every day. I know we're both learning, but yeah, I think this is a grand slam.
Yeah, and whether you started
What do
on
you
Damon's
think?
show, I think that the listener listened to both of them. I don't know of which podcast they started with, but we're humble to hear the listener is going to listen to both of them. And it sounds like they can reach out to either of us and get a free course. So possibly they'll do that. I might take you up on it. I don't know if I'm
hope you
allowed
do.
to.
You are. I hope you do. I love people taking classes. I mean, it's for me to learn, and I'm really proud of what we do at Learn It. So I hope you do.
Thanks again for coming on the show. This was fun.
Thanks for having me.